Hello, my friends. So, it has been a very long time since I've been communicating with you, since I last did a video. And there is good reason for that. I have been going through some very, very intense and once-in-a-lifetime type of life changes, challenges, growths, the whole thing, which ties into the subject. So I'll get into all of that, but again, my apologies for being absent for so long. That is not going to continue. I am getting back into my work, and as I said, as we're going through this, I will explain why I was absent and what was going on, and where I'm at today. So, life after death. We're going to talk about that. You know, when it comes to life after death, what happens to the soul, eternity, all that kind of stuff. You know, these sorts of ideas, you know, I've had very strong thoughts about them and opinions about them, and I've certainly had my own experiences. I've had at least a couple of near-death experiences that I can recall in this lifetime. So I've had my own experience with what the other side is like. But, you know, different religions have different ideas about them, and some of those ideas are very dogmatic, and some of them are a little more free-flowing, and some of them, they don't even tell you what they think about life after death. So I'm going to adopt a very flexible stance on it, except for the fact that there is life after death. There is existence after this physical body. I believe that to be true. But what is the process that happens to the individual when they die? What happens to their life essence? What happens to their personality? What happens to their thoughts, their memories? What do they go through? And I'm also going to be talking about the grieving process that human beings go through, that I think is equally as important as what happens to the soul. That it's not an isolated experience. That whatever is happening on the other side of the veil is also strongly connected to what's happening on this side of the veil. And, you know, a lot of people talk about this idea of that, you know, you have to die alone. And of course I believe there's some truth to that. But I also believe, you know, now, and I'll explain why I have that belief, is that it's not an isolated experience. There may be that moment of death where the soul has this experience that it has to go through alone. But I think that it is a shared experience for beings on both sides of the veil. So this is also a very timely topic, because we are about to head into Halloween. I don't know, what is the date today? It is Saturday the 28th. So we're in that Halloween period. So let's talk about that. So you're probably familiar with Halloween, at least here in the United States, where people dress up in costumes and they carve pumpkins and they put scary faces on the pumpkins and they put candles in it and stick it out on the doorstep, and kids go out trick-or-treating, and we focus on death. In Mexico they have the Day of the Dead. But this is not an isolated holiday. And these kinds of holidays are not arbitrary, because you find them, if you go around the world, you'll find specific times of the year all have these same kinds of celebrations. So the same is true in India. Now, they don't call it Halloween, but what they will tell you is that this time of the year is when the veil between the living and the ancestors is the thinnest. And so in ancient times, what would happen is that people would do rituals to communicate with their ancestors. And the experience is like that, you know, it's not like the movies where, you know, you see a ghost and, you know, that kind of stuff might happen, but it's more like you get downloaded information, because things in the spirit realm happen at a much different time rate than we have here, and information is given in a much different way. And so you may have just an experience of maybe a minute or 2 or 3 minutes where you feel like you're communing with one of your ancestors, but what ends up happening is that you're downloaded a huge chunk of information that would be the equivalent of sitting and talking with them for hours or days. And so that's what Halloween is really about. The fact that Halloween has become something that is frightening, and we focus on ghouls and goblins and zombies and vampires and all of that. What that really reflects is it reflects our modern, and when I say modern, I mean the past 2,000 years. It reflects our modern Western disconnect with the spiritual understandings of our ancestors. And, you know, we fear what we don't understand. And it, it shows again this idea that, something spiritual is either doesn't exist, or it's evil, or it's bad. All that came about during the Middle Ages, when the Catholic Church was working very hard to destroy the indigenous beliefs of the indigenous Europeans. And so the way that they had to do that, because they couldn't just get people to switch over to their religion, is they had to go through a very long period of disinformation where they would equate anything that was connected to the old ways as being evil. And so now we see this shadow of what this holiday used to be. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't things to be wary of. As I understand it, at least in some of the traditions in Europe, the idea was that at this time of the year, because the veil was the thinnest between the living and the dead, that if you wronged somebody, they could come back and exact revenge. So what you wanted to do is you wanted to confuse them. So that's what wearing costumes is about. Wearing costumes was to confuse the spirits so they couldn't find the person they were looking for, in case there was a spirit that was angry with you. That's what the jack-o'-lanterns are. They're there to be frightening, so that you put them out in front of your door, so that in case there's a spirit that wants to come back and get some kind of revenge from you, they would be frightened by the jack-o'-lantern, because the spirits don't experience things the same way we do. So that's what that's all about. Dressing up in costumes is about confusing any negative spirits that might come looking for you. But this was actually a very sacred day. It was called the Alpha Blot to my ancestors, the Norse, which meant the sacrifice to the elves. And it was the one time of the year in Scandinavia during this time when Christianity was taking over in Europe. One of the last places it was able to take over was in Scandinavia. So this was one of the few times of the year that they would not take in any foreigners, especially if they were Christians. And this is a big deal because in traditional indigenous European belief systems, being kind to strangers and to travelers was a sacred act. And so you were required, if somebody came to your house and they needed a place to stay, you were required to feed them and take care of them and help them on their way. And so to drive somebody away was a very, very severe action. And it shows the intense love that the ancient Europeans had for the elves. Now, the elves are the ancestral masters. These are human beings that have achieved a state of enlightenment, and they act as guides to the human race. And they're also our ancestors. So there's a connection to the ancestors and a connection to the ascended masters as well. And so this was the day that they communed with them. And so it was very sacred. And you didn't want somebody who didn't believe in that, especially who was related to a religion that sought to destroy that connection. You didn't want them on your property. It was very bad luck. You know, there's one story I remember reading. I wish I could remember where I read it, but it was a historical recounting from when a Scandinavian landowner, he was a duke or whatever an earl. You know, he was part of the elite, and so in order for them to function in that modern era at that time, they had to become Christians, otherwise they wouldn't be able to do business and make money and all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the big reasons that a lot of people back then converted. It was just for survival. So this guy was going through the conversion process, and the Catholic priest was coming over, and the Catholic priest was doing what they do and taking the holy water and shaking it on all of the sacred trees, because our ancestors used to worship trees, on the sacred stones, because our ancestors used to put the ashes of their ancestors underneath stones. That's what stone circles are all about, by the way. Underneath each of those stones will be the ashes or the remains of some high level ancestor. That's what those stone circles were about. They were about worshiping the ancestors, in case anybody didn't know. So he was going about letting the priest go and shake the holy water everywhere, and then that night he went to bed and he had a dream where his father and his ancestors came to him and said, "Why are you driving us away? We're here to help you." So this is what was going on back then. And this is why Halloween can be such an incredible time, because it's a time where you can sync up with your ancestors, where your ancestors can teach you. They can tell you what it is you need to know. And what I want to focus on in this, you know, we're going to talk about life after death and the processes of life after death and all the different beliefs. We're going to talk about that. But what I really want to share with you is how incredibly important it is to understand the significance of living this life. You know, it's really important. You know, I share that, you know, you have to have fun. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying to get all religious and you know, tight-assed about anything. What I'm saying is that this life that we have in this body is so precious, because it is an intensified experience for the soul, so that the soul can learn. And all of the challenges that we experience, that we dread, that we're trying to get away from, are actually situations that our souls have created to intensify the experience, so that the soul will be able to make new changes, be able to have new understandings. And it has to be challenging, because otherwise the soul doesn't grow. And we complain about it in this life. We complain about all of our problems. I'm not downplaying it. Some of them are really challenging and really difficult. But we complain about them and we try and get away from them. And what is most helpful for us is to understand what the challenges are wanting to teach us. And we're teaching ourselves. Nobody's doing it to us. Whatever challenges you're experiencing you've written it into your life. And running away from your challenges, being a victim and saying, "Why me?" and running away from it, is only going to make things more challenging for you in the future. And they're not as challenging as you think. And the challenges are there to give you a new understanding. Souls are growing. They're infinite in scope, but they have understandings, and they need to grow in their understandings. And the only way that we can grow from our understandings is when we are put in a situation where we have to change. So anyway, we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to share with you why this is such an important subject to me. I'll share with you why I've been gone for so long. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and put up some ads here while I check to see who's online, and we'll take it from there. So I'll be back in about 80 seconds, I think. All right, welcome back. Okay, so I didn't see any questions on there. Again, the best way to interact with me is to leave me a question. I know we all have opinions, and I am somebody who loves to spout my own opinion. But the best way to interact with me live is to leave me a question. Having said that, today's topic, I'm not going to have all of the answers. I can tell you right off the bat, I don't have all the answers. And there are some things I think that might be, generally put as rules about it, but what I've found is that this process of life after death is as varied as the people who live. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how this idea that I've been sharing with you when we talk about the matrix, and that the matrix is your own projection. Whatever you experience is your own projection. Whatever's going on in your life. This is important. This is important. This is a message for every single conscious being in the universe, whether you're in the body or out of the body. Whatever it is that you're experiencing is your own projection. We're going to talk about that. That's why it's so important to master it. That's why human life is so sacred, because human life is literally a video game experiment where you can master this understanding better than in any other form of existence. This is why souls wait and desire to be born. Those of you who are going through problems, those of you who see your life as some horrible challenge, some terrible miserable punishment. What you are not understanding is that this life is the pinnacle of learning, and that all conscious beings, they wish they could become human, because human beings have this opportunity to go into a laboratory and experiment with this power of creating your own reality. And I can promise you, if you're listening to me, you've done it before, because you have had multiple lives. There's very few people that are here for the first time. Sometimes there are. But most of you listening to me have been here probably many times. And you have gone through this. And after you've translated out of whatever body you're in and you've become a soul, you go, oh man, every time. Oh, I had such an opportunity to fix that and to learn that, and when can I go back? When can I go back? You think you want to get out of this life. You think if you get out of this life that you'll be safe, you'll be okay, it'll all be over. I can promise you, those of you who want to get out of this life the most are going to be the first to come back. If this life wasn't challenging, we wouldn't learn. But what I want to share with you is that you do have the ability, the inherent ability, to learn how to live your bliss. And when you learn how to do that, life, you know how those of you who maybe are going through challenges and you think that life is happening to you and that difficulties are happening and, you know, why do I have such bad luck? Seems like you have no control over what is happening in your life. The same kind of thing is true when you are in alignment, when your three selves are in alignment with your eternal soul and your soul is in alignment with the universe. The same thing happens in the reverse. You get the life of your dreams and it just falls into your lap. And you don't even have to try. You just simply think about what it is that you want and it happens. That is the result of facing your challenges, taking responsibility for them, and saying, what can I learn from this? How am I creating this? Because let me share something with you. And any spirits out there, this is Halloween, any spirits out there listening to me, the same thing is true for you. Whatever you're experiencing is your own projection. You are God. And being a human being is such an incredible opportunity to fine-tune that. It's like no other experience in the universe. And I'm telling you, there are souls backing up, waiting to become human. They're in line, waiting. They wish they could have the experience that you have. They wish they could have the troubles that you're having. Because they can see, from the spiritual perspective, they can see, oh my God, if that person just does this, if that person just changes the way that they look at it, oh my God, everything will change. And they go, I want it, let me do it, let me do it. I want to do it, let me do it. And then, of course, they become incarnated, and then they're there, and they forget, and then they're just like the rest of us, and they struggle with feeling like a victim. That's the lesson. That is the biggest lesson. Overcoming that mentality of being a victim. So, having said that, you're wondering, why am I talking about this? We're going to talk about some different things. First, let me, I'll go through what we'll talk about if I get to it, if the powers that be allow me to go through this. But let's talk about it. So we're going to talk about what happens right after you die. We're going to talk about what it is, what ghosts are, and there are different kinds of ghosts. Do we go to a plane of existence of bliss that many people call heaven? Does anybody ever go to a place of punishment? What people improperly call hell. Hell is a word taken from my ancestral tradition. My ancestors called the underworld hell. But nowadays we see hell as this place of eternal torment. Is this some place that we go? What about this idea that after we're dead we review our lives? What about the idea of reincarnation? And probably the thing I'm going to share with you the most, because I have a memory and experience of this. What is it that people talk to when they talk about this tunnel of light? What does that mean? So you're probably waiting. I know some of you already know. I've spoken with a few of you who know what my situation has been. Because even throughout all this, I have had to continue to Worked with clients. Thankfully enough, my business has been doing quite well, and I'm grateful to Sethakis Boza, who allowed me, who showcased me on his channel, and that's boosted my business up considerably. So I'm grateful to him for that. But I want to share with you why I've been gone for so long. I think I'll be able to talk through it. This has been a very challenging week. So, you've heard me talk about my fiance. I've mentioned her numerous times, and I talk about how she is the perfect partner for me. And how sometimes when I talk about the feminine and how the feminine and the masculine go together, and I talk about relationships sometimes, I will talk about her and about how she mirrors back to me that energy so perfectly that helps me to become the man that I am. Well, when I met her, which was almost 3 years ago, not quite. When I met her, she had stage 4 breast cancer. And she told me on our second date. And I knew from that second date, I knew she was, I didn't consciously comprehend it. It was very confusing, but I had this unshakable knowledge that this was my soulmate. I don't know how many soulmates we have, but the idea of twin souls and all that, she was it, and I knew it. And I told her. And that's not like me. Anybody who knows me throughout my life, relationships have never been something, I've had to do it for, there are just certain biological urges you gotta deal with, and well, I I gotta take care of it, so I'll have to deal with this relationship stuff. And she was the first instance of me feeling like I would give anything for this being. And I did. And she told me that she had stage 4 breast cancer, and I said I didn't care. Because when you find that, you never want to let go of it. You want to have it. And I would blubber, the second date I was blubbering in her lap. I've been waiting for you my whole life. It's been thousands of years. I didn't understand what was coming out. I'm just saying. I'm saying I've been waiting for you for hundreds of years. I finally found you. I found you. I found you. And we started to have a relationship that continued up until just over a week ago when she went home. And this is us. So, my apologies for getting emotional. I thought I was past all that. This has been a very challenging week for me. So I've been very tired. Past couple of days felt like just getting out of a war zone or something. But this is the time of year when I can honor her progress. And I can honor her transformation. And so that is why we're going to talk about this, because this is who I am. I try and share with you where I'm at, and this is how I learn. And so while I'm learning, I share that with you. So we're going to talk about that. So give me a second here to get myself together so that I can think more clearly. We'll do a little bit of ads. I'll see if there's any questions, and then let's talk through all these different things. What is this process? What does the soul go through? We'll talk about that. Okay, so thank you for the kind comments that people have said. So yeah, this is tough. I thought I had worked through all the crying, but obviously there's a lot more left to do. Anyway, let's continue with this, because the reason why I'm sharing this is because obviously for the past week, you know, and leading up to that, of course, you know, and some of you guys are very intuitive, some of you more than you realize, because the past 10 months have been very challenging, because that's been when she really started to get sick. And you know, the struggle to be with her and to empower her, and you know, never losing the belief, because I do believe it, you know, these things can change in an instant, and holding that space for her, and it was challenging, especially towards the end. And I didn't want to lose it, so I'd come on and do my stuff, and some people would write, "Are you okay?" And some of you guys knew I was barely hanging on. But obviously, because of this, even though I'm a shaman, even though I've had my own personal experiences, even though I've had near-death experiences where I, you know, have this belief based on not only what I've learned and what I've read, but what I've personally experienced. But when somebody that's that important to you goes, and goes the way that she did, because she was not going gracefully. She did not want to go, and she was afraid. She was so afraid towards the end that she wouldn't even communicate with anybody, including me. And so when she passed, I was very concerned, obviously for myself, because that was a brand new experience. I've lost people in my life, of course. I've lost both of my parents, and I've lost you know, friends and all of that. So you know, I've gone through death, but I've never gone through the death of a spouse or somebody that I felt I was completely merged with. And she and I were merged on an unconscious level. I've learned a heck of a lot about what real relationships are. I totally get why when people have grown old together, that when one dies, the other one, you know, is gone in a few days or a week. I totally get it. It's because you're so linked, you know, and your world, you know, it's not the same as when you lose a friend or a family member even, or, you know, I mean, that's tough, but when you lose that person that you have merged your unconscious with, and they're gone, your whole idea of the world just, you don't know how to function. And those first few days were horrific for me. I felt like I was losing my mind. And that's because, and I guess what I'm sharing here is, you know, here's what you want to look for in a mate. Because she was exactly what I needed, and what, you know, I feel is my soulmate. Because of that, she was able to reflect back to me my perfect self. And I'm not just talking about somebody who tells you what you want to hear, or is even nice to you, or uplifts you. You know, I get plenty of compliments. That's not it. It's that she had this ability that she saw me, not as I was, but as I am destined to be, and reflected that back to me in such a way that all of my self-destructive understandings of who I am got demolished. I mean, I couldn't hold on to my doubts about myself with that perfection being reflected back to me. And when you lose that, because you end up giving that over, You know, we get, what happens is when we grow up, we get from our parents that. Our parents ideally are supposed to reflect that to us, and most don't. Let's just be honest. Most of them don't. And so that's why people have problems. That's why people are, you know, drug addicts or alcoholics or whatever their problem is. It's because their parents weren't able to reflect back to them the perfection of what they are destined to be. And that's part of the challenge. That's why we come. We choose parents that are going to push buttons that'll force us to overcome those things. That's why we do it. So what we look for in a mate is somebody who will do that. And the first thing that we do is we find somebody who reflects the imperfect reflection that's within our parents. So men, you know, I tell women this all the time. Men are looking for their mother. Sorry, but it's the truth. And their first mistake is they're going to find a woman who will be as destructive to them as their mother was, if their mother was destructive. And then they realize that, and if they get over that, then they can do what I did. They'll attract somebody who will reflect back your perfection. And then you'll never want to leave them. You know, there were times throughout this whole thing that I just wanted out. Because I don't do well with sick people. I don't do well watching people, you know, puke stuff up. And I'm not a doctor. I don't do that. But I would have done anything for her. And to this moment I would. I would dive into hell and bring her out if that was something that was necessary. It's not. But I would do it. And it's not because of anything wonderful about me. It's because when she reflected that perfection back to me, no matter what I might want to do, I cannot extricate myself from that. That's how strong that bond is. So that's what you want to look for in a mate, whether you're male or female. So again, what I feel that I went through and am still going through is I believe that I was going through her transformation with her, because my entire identity was so connected to her that it had to change, and that was a death for me. It still is. But I feel like I'm finally starting to come out the other side of it. Not finally, it hasn't been that long, but and that's why it's so important not to focus on the temporal, because if I was still attached to the temporal, like, you know, this is going to sound perhaps cruel or cold, but you know, this image here, the person that you see in this photo here, that person no longer exists. So for me to attach myself to that, you know, to Lisa was her name, for me to attach myself to Lisa would be like, it would be attaching myself to nothing, because she's not there anymore. She is a soul that is now transforming into something else. She is not that. That will never, ever exist again. So for me to pine over that and wish to have that is insanity, because it doesn't exist. So my relationship with this being has to change if I want to continue to have that relationship. And I do. And so I look at that picture there and I see what she was, and I acknowledge and honor what that particular combination of energies did for me. But I also know that that is gone. Will never, that combination of energies will never exist again. Ever. And I'm okay with that. So let us talk about what happens. So what happens right at the moment of death? And I'll talk to you about some things that are important to know, right? So where is that picture? What happens right at the moment of death? Excuse me. So right at the moment of death, when your spirit leaves your body, Uh, the my last remaining teacher happens to be a Tibetan, excuse me, a follower of Tibetan Buddhism. And so, of course, I went to him in my grief because I needed support and help and all that. And he said that these next 3 days, right after she died, said these next 3 days are the most important. This is when you want to do mantras for the person. This is when you want to do your whatever. Whatever your religious background is, you do that thing for them. And that's because the soul for 3 days, when it exits the body, is going through that same thing that everybody else is going through. So when the person dies and everybody else is mourning and crying and they start to realize, I'm never going to see that person again, and the thing that happens in the brain, what happened in my brain was horrible. The first 24 hours, it was horrible. What would happen is that first I became aware that every single thought that I had, I mean 24 hours a day, 60 seconds a minute, every nanosecond, my brain was completely focused on she's not here, she's gone. And I couldn't comprehend it. And then like pictures of her would, either the sound of her voice or a picture of her or something would come into my brain, and it's like my brain would break. Because I realized what I shared with you earlier, that my entire identity was so fused with her, it had nothing to bounce back off of. And what you don't realize is that when you're merged with somebody, every decision you make, it bounces back off of whatever it is that you identify with. If you happen to be in that kind of a relationship, whether you realize it or not, your identity is completely merged with that other person. And when they're not there, it's like the brain just breaks. My brain broke. And I would, I'd be going through whatever I was going through consciously, and then I'd want to lie down and take a nap. And as I'd start to fall asleep, her face would come into my mind, and I'd wake up in horror. I think that's what ghost stories are all about. I think that's what the fear of ghosts is, among other things, is the inability. You see the projection of what the person was, and on some level there's nothing there. That's what's so frightening. And then I went through this fear of what's going to happen to me when I die. Am I going to lose who I am? And for the first time in my life, I was afraid of death. And then I was obsessed with, where is she? What is she thinking? What is she experiencing? And I think that is exactly what she was going through. Now, everybody's different. But as I shared with you, she was very frightened of death. In fact, she never mentioned it to me once. She never once mentioned death, ever. The closest she could come is the last time that I spoke with her on the phone. She said, I think this is the last round. And at which point I said, do you want to hear the story about when I went to heaven? And she said, I think you already told me. And then she said she had to get off the phone. She couldn't handle it. That was her thought process as she went into her death, because she died the next day. So I was experiencing, I believe, what she was experiencing. So this again is what's important to understand. Just because you leave the body does not somehow fix it. If you're holding on to this idea that when you die, if you could just kill yourself and get out of this body and then you'll be in bliss, you will take with you all of your insecurities and fears. You'll have it. That's what ghosts are. There's all different kinds of ghosts, but right now I'm going to talk about the kinds of ghosts that are the souls of human beings that are stuck here on earth. The ghosts are those souls who are stuck in that particular projection of who they were, and they can't let go of it. They are attached to it. They believe that if they lose that identity, they will die. Which is what happens, what happens all the time. Whenever you're going through a challenge, anybody who works with me, you know, I warn you guys ahead of time. If you want to work with me, you will go through personal transformation, and it will feel like you're dying. And I don't do anything. I just give you the exercises, and stuff happens. People say, you told me this was going to happen, and I didn't believe you, and sure enough, it does. And then my job is to hold your hand while you transform. So if you don't learn how to transform now, it's not going to be any easier when you die. It's going to be the same. There is no here, there. It's all right now, always. There's nothing more spiritual than what you're experiencing right now. There's nothing more real than what you're experiencing right this second. And for those of you who think that this world that we live in is an illusion, it is a computer program, and that if I can just escape this computer program, guess what? If you think this world is unreal, if you can't believe or trust anything around you right now, you will be in that hell when you die. If you leave your body, you will be in that same hell. So don't waste time. Embrace it now. Be afraid now. Go ahead. So when our body comes out of when our soul comes out of our body, our state of mind is going to have a strong effect on what we're experiencing. And if we are holding on to this life and we are afraid to let go of what it is we've attached to, then that is what will happen. So I definitely experienced this for the first 3 days after she passed. And because of the situation, the way it passed, the way things happened, as I said, she was in a lot of physical pain, and she was emotionally unable to, she couldn't see anybody because it was too much for her. And I believe part of it was because she couldn't stand the thought of leaving people that were dependent on her, children, myself, family members. The thought of leaving the people that she wanted to be with, myself, her children. That was so stressful for her. She couldn't. She had to shut herself away. And I think because of that, when she passed, and I do believe that there was an experience that we do have, and I'll share about that, where you merge with the light and you realize that you're an infinite being and that you're not whatever it was you thought you were. You're not this limited human, and you kind of have to wake up from the dream and kind of figure things out, and it can be very confusing. That then the soul needs to let go of this life. So for the first 3 days, this is what the soul does. Now, if I understand this correctly, somebody said to me that in the Jewish tradition, they have to bury the body within 3 days. I don't know if that's true or not. But if that's true, that falls in line exactly with what my Tibetan Buddhist friend said. Because those 3 days are the 3 days that the soul is trying to figure out, wait, what was I? What am I? What's happening? But and they try and connect. So funerals are important. You have to have some kind of funeral, not only for the people, because our brains need to acknowledge. And that's why we look at things like watching, if you're watching the body being burned, or if you watch somebody being buried, or all those things, the brain has to be able to go, oh, there's a dead body right there, and it's going in the ground. Otherwise, this is what zombies, a fear of zombies are. The ancient times, people were afraid. That's one of the reasons they cremate bodies, is because they were afraid the person would come back. And what they were afraid of was that what would come back wasn't the person. What would come back would be all of those fears and all of those unresolved issues and all of those intense desires. That's why zombies are seen as somebody that wants to eat your brains, and they're just constantly eating human brains, because it represents the desires within the human being that can never be fulfilled. And those frighten us. And when we think of somebody dying, and we think of the ghost coming back and haunting us, We don't imagine this beautiful connection. We are afraid because we fear what will come back are all of those unresolved. That's why ghosts are always moaning and screaming. That's why it's so scary. You know, you're not scared. You're walking down the street and you see a homeless person. You know, that doesn't scare you. But for some reason, a disembodied spirit making a noise scares you. Because it represents for you as well those things that have never been, that can never be fulfilled. And so the first 3 days, the soul has to go through letting go of all of those things and to come to accept and mourn, I'll never be able to have this, I'll never be able to have that. You know, and I'm sure that her soul was mourning over all of the plans that she and I had made for our life together and what we were going to do. She had to let go of all of that. And so I had to let go of all of that with her. And it was horrible. Absolutely horrible. And there was a time when I wanted to keep her. I thought, I'll worship her and I'll keep her with me. You know, that's incredibly selfish of me. You know, how, you know, that's, why would she want that? You know, she might want to check in with me from time to time, but she's got her own stuff to do now. She doesn't need to stay with me, right? So I went through that whole thing. And that's when I started to realize that she wasn't the same person anymore. And I think I was experiencing that as she was experiencing it. So by the end of that third day, I could feel that she had let go. Then came my own mourning. Then I had to mourn. And I did. I mourned for, I don't know how long it was. For a long time. Over my loss. But I checked in with her to the best of my ability to see where she was. And I feel very confident now that her soul has let go, because she was a very practical person, and if she became aware that like me, if something wasn't practical and wasn't useful, she'd drop it. She was really good at that. If a relationship wasn't working, she'd drop it. If it was destructive. You know, she and I are very much alike that way. And I believe that once her soul understood, whether, you know, through experience or whether she's got teachers around her telling her what's going on, I believe that her soul realized, hey, this is not me anymore. And then she became aware that you know, the lessons I'm teaching you now, that, oh my gosh, living in the moment, you know, is the most important thing, and being a human being is the most powerful way to learn that. I know that she immediately wanted to come back. And she knew that in order to do that, she had to let go of this life. So this personality of the Lisa that I know, she had to discard that, because she wouldn't be able to come back as another person if she did. And I felt it. I don't know where she is now, but my feeling is that she has already released herself from this life, and that she has begun to absorb the new identity that she wants to create for herself. And the reality that if she and I truly are soulmates, it's not going to happen within my lifetime again, you know, because I'll be, you know, 75 when she's, you know, a 20-year-old girl, if she were to get born a girl again. So it's never going to happen again in this life. So that means that she has probably in front of her this choice of creating a life for herself and lessons within that life that don't include me, but that will probably help her when she and I reconnect again. So that's what happens during the first 3 days. Now I did, and the reason why I say this about ghosts is because that first day when she passed, and I got the information, which was right afterwards, like, you know, an hour afterwards, somebody told me. And I went through first the relief, because I had been watching my soulmate, my best friend, you know, die a horrible death for a really long time, and it was so draining and horrible, and just the relief of, oh my God, that's finally over. And then all the mourning really started to hit me. All the real pain started hitting me. I forgot what I was saying. But that first day, I was very upset with her because I was hurt and angry because she hadn't allowed me to be with her in her final moments. And it was so hurtful to me that she had shut me out and wouldn't let me know where she was. Not that I was chasing after her. I told her I'd leave her alone because I understood that. It was like my gift to her that I wouldn't go visit her. But then she moved and then wouldn't, put this list of people she wouldn't let in, which included me. And just that in itself, that she didn't trust me, that hurt me so badly. So I regret it, but those first hours after I learned, I was angry with her, and I was hurt, and I was crying, and I was yelling to her, why did you do that to me? I didn't deserve that, and all of that. And in one of those tirades, as I'm yelling out to her and crying and yelling and doing all the stuff that I did, I only had one thing left in my home of hers. I had gotten rid of everything because I knew she was going to go, and to see all of her stuff around because she wasn't going to come back. Oh, crap. Oh, here we go. All right, so the stream seems to be shutting off. So I'm hoping you guys are still there. Can you still hear me? Let me see. Is it still happening here? What's going on here? Okay. It looks like things are still happening. Okay, so I'm going to keep going until this tells me not to. But that during one of those tirades, as I said, the only thing that was left in my apartment were 2 little bottles of conditioner that were sitting on top of my shower that had been there for weeks. And as I was doing it, I heard this crash in the bathroom, and I went to go see what it was, and sure enough, it was those 2 little bottles of conditioner. So I knew she was still around. And I had an experience where I felt that she was trying to communicate with me and really trying to apologize, and I could barely, it was hard to tell through my grief if I was imagining it, if it really was her. I do think it was her. I think it was in that first day she had to go through that. You have to fix the problems and let go. The guides let you do what you have to do those first 3 days so that you can let go. So I do believe that there are ghosts that are souls, but I can say that they're not the same as the ghosts that we consider to be, really frightening and dangerous. I think those are something else. I've shared about that. So, okay, so those are the first 3 days ideally, and ideally the ghost phase only lasts for a few days. Maybe it'll last longer than that depending on how many people there are, how much the soul has to let go of. But we also have to understand that on the spiritual plane, that things can happen much more rapidly or much more slowly. A really good way to understand this is, if you haven't seen it, go rent or stream the movie Inception. And it talks about going into the deeper levels of the unconscious. They don't use the word unconscious, they use the word subconscious, which is incorrect. They mean the unconscious. But that is what happens next. And so if the soul has unresolved issues, unresolved desires, unfulfilled desires, regrets, it has to go to the underworld. So let's talk about that. What happens when the soul goes to the underworld, and what does all of that mean? So I'll be back in a little bit, see if there's any questions. Okay, so the underworld, that is In the Christian tradition, again, this gives you an idea of how divorced modern religion and modern society is from themselves. Because our ancestors had this understanding that there was this place called the underworld, which they called hell. Hell does not mean eternal torture. It meant the underworld, and it came from the name of the goddess Hela. For those of you who are Scandinavian, her name is not Hel, it is Helia. There's Hel and Helia, but in some of the Old Norse they kind of squished it, and the name of the place is the name of the goddess. But her name is Hela, and her domain is hell, the underworld. But the Christians and many modern people think hell is this. Eternal torment. Now, why is it that fire is associated with eternal torment? What is fire? Fire represents the heart, it represents passion, it represents emotions, it represents the things we are passionate about. So hell is the place for those who feel they're being punished. Hell is the place you go when you are consumed with your desires and you cannot fulfill them. The look on that woman's face, the look of regret, the look of, that's the idea. And so from the Christian perspective, that is an eternal state, which what that tells you is that that's the internal unconscious state of that religion. When you're in that religion, when you're that divorced, when you're being told that you are evil, that you are sinful, that God hates you and had to kill his own son and then splash his blood all over you in order to be able to tolerate your own existence, that's a hell. That's what hell is, eternal punishment. So, do places like that exist? The answer to that is yes, but they are self-created. That is why it is so important to live in the moment now. By the way, those states of hell are not eternal. It's not possible for any consciousness to stay in that kind of hell for eternity. It's impossible. But like with the movie Inception, if you've ever watched the movie, the deeper they go into the unconscious mind, that 1 minute can be 1,000 years. And so they had to work with this potential pitfall that if they go to the deeper levels, that even just a few seconds or a few minutes could be entire, thousands of years, and they could be in hell for thousands of years. And then even if they were to come out, they'd be like a vegetable. So they had to make sure that they didn't stay in that state underneath for too long, because it would destroy their whole identity. But that's what the underworld is. And if there is somebody who has, and I believe this was potentially the case with my fiance, because she had some, she obviously, when somebody's in that much fear of death, there's obviously some unresolved stuff that she took with her. I'm firmly of the belief that in my timeline she's already through all of that, and she may even be reborn. I'm not even sure if she's got a new body yet, but she's moving towards it if she doesn't have one already. But I do believe that she went through an underworld experience. And I do believe that, when you're in the underworld, if you have a lot of really intense stuff, you can spend as much time as you need to deal with that in whatever way you want. So there are hells there, but they're self-created. If you are filled with guilt, then you will be allowed to create a hell for yourself. And if you believe you need to spend an eternity there to punish yourself, then you will go deeper and deeper into the levels of your own unconscious, in your spirit. And you can spend, 10,000 years there, which will be a second for those of us in this timeline. So I believe that she had that. I don't know how long she was there, but I get the feeling that there was a lot she had to work through. And I believe that was at the time when I could feel that she was no longer here anymore. I get the sense that she's back from that, but I also get the sense she's somebody else now. And she no longer has the codependent need to take care of me. She has accepted that I have a different path from her now, and she's okay with that. And she's moving on into her own thing. I can feel it. So that is, we've got the 3 days after death, which of course could go longer, but I think that's a general rule. I think that works. And then you have the life review experience, which can be, as I said, it could be a hell experience, meaning, a uncomfortable, challenging, purgatory kind of experience. Or it can be the experience of sitting with your counsel, sitting with your guides, who will then review your life, and then you can look at it and decide, oh, there, I messed up there, meaning that was an opportunity for me to change and to grow, and I acted out of fear. Do you get now why I keep telling you the most important thing that you need to understand is do not operate from fear? You can feel afraid, don't get me wrong, you can feel afraid. That is okay. But take action. Take action from fearlessness. Fearlessness is nothing more than trust. It doesn't mean jumping off a cliff with a sword and you screaming. That's not fearlessness. Fearlessness says, I'm afraid nothing's ever going to happen, but I'm going to act as though the universe is with me and the universe will guide me, but I'm really afraid. That is fearlessness. You act in trust. Because that is the lesson. That is it. That is why our ancestors, my ancestors particularly, believed that if a soul died from illness or old age, it went into the underworld and then came back as a human being. And if the soul died in battle, it went to Valhalla, the Hall of the Chosen. Dying in battle does not mean killing somebody. It means that when you died, you had no unresolved desires, that you fearlessly went after what gave you joy in life. So that when you were done, you'd sit there, and if somebody asked you, okay, what is it that you wish you had done? You go, nothing, I think I did it all. I can't think of anything. I did everything I wanted to do. What's next? That's the difference. My girlfriend wasn't at that place yet. She wasn't able to go, what's next? She wasn't able to let go. She was so afraid of dying. And it's clearly because there were things that she hadn't achieved, that she hadn't gotten for herself. And some might even make the conclusion that that was the cause of her cancer to begin with. Deep, unresolved desires that she wasn't allowed or able to embrace. So she's going to get to come back and do it again. So that's why it's so important to live fearlessly. And not to wait. Don't wait until you've exited the matrix. Do it now. People, this is why I have the dynamic that I have with my students. When people come to me and they ask for my help, I charge them money. Because you'll find out very quickly how serious somebody is about learning. It's true that I do need money to survive, and this is what I do for a job, so it wouldn't matter if I was a plumber or a doctor or, whatever. I would charge money to do a service. This happens to be what I do. But it's even more important in the spiritual aspect because, I get emails all the time from people who tell me, you don't understand, I have this thing and the life-threatening and the blah, 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 and I need your help. Can you help me? Can you please talk to me? And I say, sure. Go on and purchase an astrology reading, but just simply, email me back and tell me that you just want a private session. They go, oh, $108. Well, can you just do a 15-minute? And I'm like, no, I need at least an hour to get to know you and talk to you, to even know if I can help you or not. Well, I don't have 100. You just got through telling me that you're in this major life crisis and that you need help and I'm the only one that can help you. Are you going to tell me that you can't, if I were to tell you right now that I'd give you $1 million if you gave me $100, you would find $100 pretty damn quick if you thought it was going to get you what you wanted. And then I know they're not serious. I'm not judging because I've been there. I've done it. You have to be willing to be fearless. And you have to trust, because if I gave those people what they wanted, what I can guarantee them is that they will get nothing from it. Because they won't value it. And because they didn't have to trust, I would still be placating them and saying, yes, you're a victim and life is victimizing you and you're poor and you'll never have any money, so here, let me, because I have more than you and because, you know, you have less than I do. Do you see how condescending that is? And I'm not going to do that to anybody. Odin taught me that. Odin is very clear about that. Odin says that you are above no one, and no one is above you. This is why Odin hates Christianity. Because they worship somebody who killed himself, allowed himself to be killed, to give salvation to others when they had the ability to get it for themselves. And what a tremendous, condescending, I mean, that's just such a put down. That's why Odin hates it. He hates it. Because what Odin represents is the divinity within the self. Odin died to himself. And then he says, I'll teach you how to do that. But if you don't believe that you're going to go through a hell, that you're going to go through a death experience, and you want somebody else to take it for you, you won't appreciate it. You'll get nothing from it. You have to die to yourself. And that death to yourself is nothing other than taking risks when you are afraid. That's all it is. I'll just boil down spirituality into this one thing. You can read as many books as you want. You can go to as many teachers as you want. You can get as many dikshas and initiations and all. You can do that for millions and millions of years if you want, and you will still be nowhere. Because there's only one thing that you need to do. And that is to live your life in this moment as if it were your last. And to take risks for what you want, regardless of how impossible it seems. And it doesn't matter whether you get it or not. And when you can get into that state and learn through practice that you keep taking risks and you don't die, you do the thing that you think is going to kill you, whether it's asking that girl out on a date or getting the down payment for an apartment or paying me $100 to talk to you for an hour and you think you can't do it because you can't afford it. Whatever the heck it is, do it. And when you learn how to live in that state, then guess what? Death won't be a problem for you. In fact, you'll welcome it. You'll get to the end of your life and you go, man, that was a blast. This body's worn out. All right, I'm done with this one. Let's get another one. What's next? When you get to that state, then you don't have to come back. So for those of you who don't want to be reincarnated because you're done with this stupid world and it's ugly and gross and it's blah, 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 blah. For those of you that are like that, you're guaranteed to come back. For those of you who, I'm not saying I'm there. I'm working, I'm learning. Everything I'm telling you to do, I'm telling myself. I'm not above you. I'm just as human as anybody here. So don't get me wrong. But when you get to that place where you're like, yeah, man, that was really cool. I want to do that again. Then the universe says you don't need to. You can come back if you want and be a teacher or a helper, but you're done. There's other stuff. You want to move on? You'll be like, hell yeah, let's go to the next level. Am I making sense? Okay. Take a little break, calm myself down here, and we'll See if there are any questions. All right, so now let's talk about reincarnation. I know there are people on there, I already looked some of the comments, there are people who don't like it and don't want to believe it. I don't know what your background is, but I know there's a lot of people out there that have bought into this, and I'm going to explain this mentality. I've shared it, so I understand it. I'm not judging it. But the belief system that is popular now is that there are these false beings of light who are waiting for you when you exit your body, who are there pretending to be beings of light and love and joy, who are going to lie to you and tell you that you have to go back and be reincarnated. And they do that so that they can feed off of you. They keep you trapped in this matrix so they can feed off of you, and they'll keep you there forever. So again, if you're new to my channel, you're new to what I teach, what is the first fundamental rule I teach? Get rid of any fear-based belief system. Any belief system that says you are a victim on any level, get rid of it. I'm just telling you that because you won't be able to accomplish what you want in life. And that's my main goal. My main goal, even though I'm teaching you all of these spiritual things, and I teach you, you know, the energy work and all that stuff, the bottom line of everything that I'm here to do, my single job is to give you the ability to get everything that you truly want in life, in your deepest of souls, so that you can connect to that. Once you do that, you don't need me. You don't need anybody. Once you connect to your infinite soul, that which empowers you to bring you the most joy in your life and be the most helpful and healing thing you can be to the world. You can't have one or the other. They're both there. You can't be a martyr and go out and save the world and live a life of torture. No, that is destructive. You will harm yourself and everybody else. You can't just be out for yourself and just get what you want at other people's expense. You will not find happiness, and you will harm others, and you will harm yourself. There is only one true path, which is you are fulfilling all of your deepest desires, and simultaneously as you do that, you are helping everybody else, everything in existence around you. That is it. I got so caught up in that I forgot what I was saying. But that's the first step, is get rid of the fear. So ask yourself, let me ask you this, those of you who believe, who are angry with me and feel incensed because I am now giving you some different belief, and I'm telling you that there's no such thing as evil archons, or that there's no such thing as demons trying to destroy you unless you create them. Those of you who take offense to that, let me ask you, which universe would you rather live in? Would you rather live in a universe where you can determine what exists and what doesn't? Or would you rather live in the universe you live in now, where there are these beings that are stronger than you, that can control you and trap you and keep you, that you have to escape from? Just which universe would you rather live in? I'm going to tell you a secret. Most people would rather live in the universe where somebody else controls them. Most people want to live in a universe where there's some evil archon, or some god, or some devil, or some reptilian being waiting to devour them. Because then they don't have to take responsibility. And if you don't take responsibility, you don't have to face that risk I'm talking about. The risk of jumping off that cliff and trusting. That is the most frightening thing in the world. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw it. With the being in the universe that I love the most, I saw it in her. She was scared to death. She'd still be here today. She'd be here today on a lung machine in pain, if that meant she didn't have to die. She held on to this life so strongly, even when she was miserable. Now that was her old, she's not that person anymore. So who knows what's going on with that soul now, but that's what I saw. And that's how most people live. And that's why the world is the way it is. But when you have real teachings that tell you there's no guru out there that's going to give you what you need, there's no God out there that's going to give you what you need, you are everything. And the moment that you realize that and to begin to live that way, regardless of how frightening it is, that then all of those other things are going to start to fall away. Okay, so I don't know what the hell I'm saying. I'm just kind of babbling at this point now. So I'll see if there are any questions. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the light. This is something that is not up for negotiation either. This is definitely something that exists. So let me see. Excuse me. I'm not seeing any questions. Somebody asked who Odin is. Odin's name comes from the ancient tribal Germanic word Woden, which means he who is consumed with the ecstasy of self-awareness. Wod is the ecstasy of self-awareness. We do it now. We go, whoa. That's what Woden is. Woden is whoa. Someone who is full of whoa. The wonder of his or her own existence. That's what we are all destined for. Romney on Germany does have a question. Again, that's the best way to connect with me. One question I always had while spiritual development, if I have reached the highest level, what then? Well, you're thinking in two-dimensional terms. If we live in an infinite universe, there isn't a highest level. There's ever-expanding growth. So I think the universe is fun. I like to look at it that way. So to me, the idea of reaching nirvana and this emptiness, that sounds really boring to me. I think there are continuous levels of being. Even if we go to this place of emptiness where we merge back to the void, guess what happens? We start all over again. But I think what happens is that each time that we recreate ourselves and or the universe, it is moved up to another level. So there isn't one. And don't worry about that. You're not there yet, obviously, or you wouldn't be asking that question. So just be where you are. Forget about what's coming. You know, live for today. That statement. There's nothing more profound than just living one day at a time, one moment at a time. There's nothing more profound in the universe. Whether you're in the body or whether you're a spirit floating around, you still have to live in the moment. Otherwise, you're dead. Okay. All right, so I don't see any questions there. Oh, here's a question. All right, so Wilma Hopkins is asking the question, which I'm just about to answer, which is the light at death the same as the light in meditation? That is a good question. The light. Merging with the light. So, whenever you hear about near-death experiences, you hear people talking about death, even in multiple different traditions, whether it's Christian or otherwise, you hear people say there's a theme that seems to run through the majority of them, which is there's this light, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and there's this desire to go to the light. I recently read an account by somebody who claims to have died and come back, and whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I found his account interesting. And he had that same experience. He exited his body, and as he was out of his body, there was this light. And he felt himself being pulled towards the light, and he said, wait a second, stop. And it stopped. And then all of a sudden he realized he had power over it. And he said that, and he had the experience that a lot of souls and a lot of people may not realize that they have power over that experience when it happens. So he said, hey, wait a minute, stop. What is happening here? And then he got into this conversation with the light, who communicated in whatever form the light communicates, and explained to him, not so much explained to him, but reflected back to him things about this whole process. And so that's what allowed him to have this experience where he went on this journey to learn about this whole life-death thing. And anyway, so he was able to come back because he chose to. Let me talk about reincarnation for a second. One thing that is misunderstood about reincarnation. Reincarnation is always voluntary. Always. There is never a time when some soul is forced back into a human body. That's too sacred a thing. The human body and the ability to have the human experience is too sacred. The universe won't waste it on somebody who doesn't want it. Trust me. It's only for those who volunteer. And so coming back is always voluntary. And you decide on what you're going to experience. Now, having said that, there may be souls who have the same experience this guy was having, which is they feel they're being inextricably pulled towards the light until they realize that they can stop. So it's not that it's happening to them, it's coming from them. So if somebody, if a soul has an experience that it's thrust back into a human body against its will, that's again their experience of they don't realize they can control the process. You know, the Hindus will tell you multiple things, and one of them will be that your desires will be so overwhelming that they pull you back into denser existence, which is being in a body, which is nothing more than saying that your desires bring you back. As a Vedic astrologer, I can tell you that you look at where Rahu and Ketu is, the north and south nodes of the moon. The north node of the moon will tell you what the desire was that was so unbearable that it forced them to come back and become a human again. And when you look at Ketu, which is the south node of the moon, you see what it is that they mastered in a previous life that they no longer need to do, that they've already mastered. These are some of the things you get with a Vedic reading from me, by the way. I can show you that. So let me tell you my experience with the light. I may have shared this before, maybe I didn't. I've had at least a couple, but this one was by far the most profound experience. When I was 7 years old, I was a Christian because I was, you know, that was 1967 or something. No, how old am I? That was 1970, I think. I was 7 years old, and I was a very, very spiritual little kid, and because I was a Christian, I was very attached to Jesus. And for some reason, one day I got this overwhelming feeling that Jesus didn't love me. And it was very depressing. I don't know where that feeling came from. I think what it was is that one of my guides sort of put that in me so that I would then have the need to have the experience that I'm going to share with you. And so I was very sad, and I remember saying, Jesus doesn't love me, I can just feel it. And that night I had a dream. And what ended up happening is I felt myself being pulled out of my body. And as I was pulled out of my body, and I was just this, you know, this spirit, I couldn't see anything, but I felt myself go through this layer of emotional, I don't even know what to call it, but it was just all the chatter. It was just like all these sounds and voices and conversations, and it was like radio chatter, you know. It was like I was going through, and it was just all of this jumble of thoughts and feelings and conversations and blah, 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 blah. And then I came through that, and then there was space, and it was quiet. And then I was in this very dark place, and then there was this light that started getting bigger and bigger and brighter, and whether or not it was coming towards me or I was going towards it, I didn't know. But the light was so bright that I knew that if I were looking at it with my physical eyes, it would burn my eyes right out of their sockets. I knew that the flesh on my bones would come off. It was so intensely bright. So I knew that I was seeing it with my spiritual eyes, if there are such a thing, and not with my physical body. And I felt very comfortable, and then the light surrounded me, or I went into it, whichever, and I became completely absorbed in this orgasmic bliss that was so intense. The joy and the love was so intense, it was almost uncomfortable. I mean, it was like, you know, it's like, you know, the best orgasm you ever had, but with your entire essence. It wasn't sexual, by the way. I'm just trying to explain to you the experience of it. And I ended up saying, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home. And all of a sudden, that's all I could experience was where I was at, and I had no desire to leave. That was where I belonged. That was my true essence. That was where I came from. And I was back there now. I was home. And so as I'm in that bliss of I'm home, and just feeling so secure and so safe and so happy and so not caring what's going to happen next, because I was so completely fulfilled on the deepest level. Then the light started to fade and it started moving away from me. And then it was horrible, the emptiness. And I started saying, no, 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 no. And I was crying, no, 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 I don't want to leave, I don't want to leave. And the light went further and further away, and that emptiness, it was so, not that where I was, it was a horrible place, it was just the, you know, having experienced that and having that taken away, it was just such a horrible, empty feeling. And then I began to fall down through the space again, and then I hit that spot in the atmosphere of all the voices. And I was, oh my God, I'm back in this crap hole. And then I felt myself lightly going back into my body, and then boom, I was awake. Back in my little 7-year-old brain, having to try and figure all that out. So I've had that experience. And it's exactly the way people describe it. Now, here's the interesting thing. When I was done with that experience, I went for years and told people that I had seen Jesus. And when I left Christianity in my late 20s, mid to late 20s, you know, I still had that. I'm like, well, what about that experience I had with Jesus? And then I went, wait, let's look at it. And when I analyzed it, I realized that that light never once said who it was or what it was. It didn't speak to me in that way. It didn't say, hi, I'm Jesus. It just was. And it was me. And this is what I am talking about. When I talk about being in alignment with your deepest self, what I'm talking about is being in alignment with that joy. That's why I say, when you are in alignment with yourself, you know you're going after your true destiny when the thought of that brings you joy. And because it is your lesson, you will have to make a choice between doing what you think other people want you to do. You will have to make a choice between getting other people's love and respect, or whatever it is in your mind you think is that the world wants from you. On some level, you'll have to make a choice between that and what it is you really want. And going after what you really want will mean letting go of that, and it will feel like a death. And it will scare the hell out of you. And this is what I'm telling you. That if you make the choice to do that thing you're afraid of, and go after the thing you know you really want, no matter how frightening it is, you will end up connecting more deeply to that joy that is the light. That is you. It's not God. It's not out there. It's you. The only thing that happened to me in that dream is that I was this projection that has named itself Michael William Denny, that thinks it's a 54-year-old male. This projection that these energies are now pretending to be are like just a projection from that light. And when I align myself to my highest joy, I'm aligning myself with that light. You can call it whatever name you want. You can call it Odin, you can call it Jesus, you can call it Buddha, you can call it whatever name you want to call it, you'll probably be right. But ultimately, it's you. The one thing that the Christian tradition got right is that the kingdom of heaven is within you. And they got that right. There's a lot of things they didn't get right, but they got that one right. Now, I can tell you that because I believe I've had an experience with that I can remember in this lifetime. But you've also had that experience and you've chosen to forget it. Because if you remembered it, then the challenge and the fun of going through the challenge of life wouldn't be as rewarding for you. Okay? So, anyway, who knows what the hell I've said. I think I've said pretty much all I want to say. There's one last thing I'll say before we go, but until we do that, I'm going to take a little time for some ads, and if there are any questions, I'll answer them. But you know, again, I haven't really. This isn't really a question and answer, but I'll check and see what's there. Okay, so there are some questions here, and again, this is just my opinion. You know, the truth is that, you know, the religions that I respect are the information about this is very scant. Like Hinduism, you can't really find anything in Hinduism about it. Same thing in Buddhism. You know, you'll find Buddhists that believe in the soul, and some say there is no soul. And I think that's there for a reason, because it's, again, once you start, you know, putting into stone rules about the afterlife, then people get complacent and they miss the point of being here. So any experiences that I have or any opinions that I have are just that, my opinions. And you have my permission to disregard anything and everything I say, because ultimately it doesn't matter. But our intellect loves to ask these kinds of questions, makes us feel good, so I'll be happy to answer them. So, Rousseau Van Royen asks, what are some crystals that powerfully initiate the alchemical transmutation of the demiurgic confusion we experience since incarnation? That assumes that crystals are somehow going to fix the problem. You know, listen, I use them. I wear a moonstone because that is my Dharma Devata, which means that the moon helps me connect to my soul desire, and a moonstone helps vibrate on that level, but it's just a tool. You don't need a crystal. Just do what I'm telling you. Get connected to yourself, ask yourself what it is you truly want, and be aware of the fears that you have that have been preventing you from going after what you want, and then take that risk. That is the only thing you need to do to have the alchemical transmutation you're talking about. That's it. It's not going to come from crystals. It's not going to come from power plants. It's not going to come from gurus or teachers. It's only going to come from you. And you can do it at any moment. Okay, so let's see, another question. Are there any entertainment in the afterlife? Well, that assumes the afterlife's going to be boring. The only reason we have entertainment in this life is because we get bored. So you won't be bored in the afterlife. Sure, I'm sure there's tons of things that are entertaining. The thing is, I'm sure you'll be able to create whatever the heck you want. Just like you can now. You can create whatever you want now. And the point of being here is to learn to master how to do that. So when you're in the spirit realm, you can do it without any, you'll be a master of creating everything you want. So yeah, I'm sure there is. Any other questions? Let's see. Why do some people go to hell in their NDEs? So I think I answered that, but I'll answer it again. What you mean by hell is you mean punishment, because the first and the traditional meaning of the word hell was the underworld. The Christians stole it from the pre-Christian Germanic peoples and used their word for the underworld and used it for a place of torment. So what you're asking me is, why do some people go to a place of torment in their near-death experiences? And that's because of what I'm telling you now. You will experience in the afterlife what you have in this life. If you believe that you are a victim, if you believe that there are things out there controlling you, if you believe whatever it is that you fear, if you've created a world that is full of fear, then that's where you will go. Now, you won't stay there forever, because at some point the soul will decide this is ridiculous and will let go of it. If you have guilt, whether that's because you've done something in this life that you've acted out of, and you've been out of alignment with your integrity, and you've been harmful to others and you're aware of it, and you haven't been able to forgive yourself, then you will create a place of punishment until you're done. It's all ego. When your ego is done beating itself up and you realize you're wasting your time, you'll leave that, and then you'll come back. If you have lived a life where you've been obsessed with certain things that you can't let go of, then you will create a place where you live that unfulfilled desire until you realize that it's a waste of time, and then you'll give up, and then you'll come back. So the reason why is because what you have is what will be waiting for you, because you created it. What you have now will be there. The difference is that we have, in the human realm, we have this disconnection where we are unaware of what we call the unconscious. It's still there, but you're not aware of it. When you die, you will become fully aware of all the things you were unaware of. That's why it's so important to do the work I'm saying, which is to balance the three selves. And I'll get into that. We're not just one self, we're three. But when you have a balance of all three selves, then the unconscious mind will be clean. Then when you exit this, you will go to what's in your unconscious, which will be wonderful things. Okay? So it's all just about knowing yourself. If you're avoiding yourself, you're going to have to face it. If you're not avoiding yourself and you're using this time as a human being to get to really experience yourself on the deepest levels, then you'll be able to create the heaven of your dreams when you're done. Okay, so Obi-Wan, I already answered that question. Will our perception of time change after death? Watch the movie Inception, because there is no such thing as time. But you can have different perceptions of it, and you can have different experiences of it. I know this because I've had this experience where I've dreamt. I remember once I had a dream where I lived an entire life, like 90 years. It was an entire life. I lived it. But I'm sure the dream only lasted a few minutes, because dreams happen very quickly. You know, when you close your eyes for what's really just like a second, or have you ever done this? You'll like fall asleep for a couple seconds, you have an entire dream, you wake up and the guy's only said 3 words, right? So things happen much more deeply on different levels of existence. So things can go very slowly or very quickly. So the answer is yes. All right, that's it for that. So I'm going to talk to you now about the 3 selves, because this has everything to do with the transformation I'm going to tell you about. So again, I'm telling you that, as I'm doing this, this is helping me a lot, because it's helping me to release a lot of stuff. It's helping me to process. This is how I process. I talk. This is how I process the things in my brain. So when we look at this picture of me and my soulmate here, who has passed on, that person that you see in that picture does not exist anymore. It's even true of me, even though I still look the same. I'm not that person. I'm not that person anymore. You know, that's a couple years ago, and I've totally changed. Well, she's no longer in that body. That body won't function anymore. And so that means that all of the influences of that body, the brain that she had, the body that she had, all of the things that she had within that body are no longer coloring how she views herself, unless she chooses to hold on to that. If she wants to continue to be that person again, she can maybe try and find a body that will help, you know, her have that again. But my feeling is that she's done with that. She was always very practical, and I think she realized that I think she's moving on to a new experience. So I don't know what she's going to recreate. She's going to take what she wants and create something new. Some new challenges, some new things to work through. So besides all the things I just mentioned, the different brain and the body and whatever you inherited from your family and all that kind of stuff, that influence you, that influence how you think, your behavior, your personality, we also are made up of 3 separate entities. We are not one entity, we are 3. The one that we are most connected to, which is connected to our conscious mind, is our soul. And that is what is the focus of this life. The focus of this life is the progression and the journey of the soul. However, there are 2 other beings that are working in communion with you, but they are different from you. But they influence, and their job is to focus to help you. And those are, you have a higher self. You have a higher self, which is a different being. It's not you. But you and your higher self have chosen to work together in this life. And your higher self acts as a guide. So a lot of the intuition that you get, you know, when people look up, they kind of look up to the left. That's you unconsciously trying to connect to your higher self. Your higher self is getting information directly from the advanced masters, from the realm of the ancestral masters, who my ancestors called the elves. The Buddhists call the bodhisattvas. Catholics call them saints. But we're all talking about the same thing, the orishas, the Africans call them. Talking about the ascended masters, who are semi-divine. They were human, but now they've moved beyond that. And they act as beings of guidance to us. And they are only there for us when we ask for it. They never barge in and tell us anything. They're only there to help us. So you have the higher self, which is connected to the soul and wants to help the soul. But the higher self has a much stronger connection with the lower self. I'm pointing to my navel right now. This is how my ancestors described it. My ancestors described the Trinity as Odin, Vili, and Ve. So what we would call the higher self, my ancestors would call Odin, whether they realized what they were talking about or not. We always talk about our soul and we point to our chest because our heart center is where our soul is. And the soul is the main perceiver and actor. It's the soul is the king. That's why the sun in astrology represents the king, because the sun represents the soul. The word for soul in English is Saul. We still spell it S-O-U-L. It was called Saul. That was also the word for the sun in the sky, the Saul. It means the same thing. It means this is the sun of the individual. It's the center. Everything revolves around it, around the sun, the soul. Everything revolves around your soul. Your soul is the king. It makes all the decisions, but it is powerless by itself. Can't do anything on its own. The upper self works directly with the lower self. The lower self is a bunch of different entities in there. This is where the dwarves live. The dwarves are emotional projections that you create. A lot of the demons in the world, a lot of the ghosts in the world, a lot of the earth spirits in the world are people's emotional thought forms that have made it out into the world. So this is what another type of ghost is. Because the soul doesn't want to. The soul is not naturally aligned to stay on the earth by itself. The soul will be a ghost when it leaves the body for the first few days or however long it needs to adjust. But once it's done with that, it's out of here. It's back up to learn, or it's back into another body. It doesn't stay. There are ghosts that do stay here. These are earth spirits. The reason why we say boo is because in the ancient Indo-European word, which is still used in the Sanskrit, bhu, boo, it means earth, and it's a word for ghost. So the reason why we go boo isn't because we're saying that's the noise that ghosts make. It's a very, 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 very old way of walking up to somebody and saying, ghost! It's a very ancient Indo-European word that's still in our language today, but we don't know that it's a word. But we know it as it's the sound of ghosts. It means earth realm. And so there are ghosts that are attached to this earth, and these are the lower selves of people who have died either because they were new souls and immature, they didn't work well with their lower selves, or because they died in tragedy, and so they didn't have time to align their three, they weren't there yet, and so their lower self left and is running around still thinking it's a human being and thinking that it's jumping off the cliff or getting run over by the train or whatever it is. And so every single night it plays that out because it's that lower self that's no longer connected to the soul of the person, and it still plays it out. And what ends up happening with these lower selves when they're squirted out onto the earth plane is that they will run around with the identity of whoever they were connected to, the ego of whoever they were connected to, until they slowly start to forget, and then they become an earth spirit, and then they will go back into the earth. And so these are earth spirits. So a lot of the spirits that are around in the trees and all that, these used to be, probably hundreds or thousands of years ago, were somebody's lower self that are now part of the earth. You don't understand this, but you can create all kinds of spirits. You can choose to, with your lower self, create elemental spirits. You can create helper spirits. You can do all kinds of things. But you can also create demons. This is why all this stuff is flying around. It's why all that stuff is here. So people get all wrapped up in ghosts and ghost hunting, but it's sort of like chasing after homeless people. You can go down to Skid Row and find homeless people, but really it's like, why do you want to, let's give them some food and get them moving on. People get all wrapped up. Ooh, a ghost said this. I got a recording of a ghost. It's this squirted out lower self of somebody that's homeless, basically. So you have a responsibility. As the soul, you have a responsibility to try and stay conscious, because the more conscious you are, your lower self will align itself. Now, your lower self wants to become a soul. It wants, when it gets to the point where it develops enough where it's a soul, then it can incarnate into a human being. The higher self used to be a soul, is not a soul anymore. Now it's trying to become an elf, an ancestral master. And so in order to do that, it has to help. So when everybody's working together, that's when you have a successful life. But if the soul is not making a conscious effort to stay connected on all three levels, then you're doing these other two souls, I'm pointing at my navel too, you're doing these other two entities a disservice. Because that poor lower self has not been given the proper tools to then move on and become a soul. So you're not just living your life. You hear this like drug addicts, alcoholics, they'll say, I'm not hurting anybody, get out of my business. No, you are hurting somebody. You're hurting these two other entities that have decided to, hitch themselves to you, to help you, and here you are being uncooperative in your selfishness and your childishness and your immaturity. You're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting these two other beings. And then they have to look at it, and who knows what they've learned, but I'm imagining, somebody going, what a waste of time that was. Why did I hook up with that soul? Geez, I could have been with that other guy. He's got it together. So I don't know, this is the part I don't know, is after the soul leaves the body and goes through all that, do you have ongoing relationships with upper and lower selves, or do you have to recreate yourself, in a different trinity each time? I don't know. That's why I know that, my fiance is if she's taken on a different lower self and higher self, she's going to be a totally different being. So it's a waste of time for me to mourn over her because she doesn't exist anymore. If I want to stay in connection with that part that is my soulmate, then I'm going to be thinking about the progression of that soul and who that soul has decided to become. You know, she may have decided to be a male this time, which would mean I'm not going to have the same experience. I'm not, you know, I'm on a different spectrum there when it comes to sexuality. So, see what I mean? I can mourn over the past, I can pine over the past, or I can stay in the moment and I can move. And the reason why this is important is because I am committed to that soul. Who and whatever that soul is. I am still committed to the evolution of that soul to the same degree I was when she was in the body with me here. But if I want to get to be the most helpful to her, I have to let go of who she was and to be thinking and be flexible enough to allow her to be whatever she wants to be. And to be thinking not about the past, but about the future.